Let me tell you something about walking away. Not the kind of walking away people post about online. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind where doors slam and words are shouted. I'm talking about the quiet kind of leaving. The kind that happens when a man finally understands that staying has started to cost him more than leaving ever could. Shi Yan Ming didn't wake up one morning and decide to leave Shaolin. That's not how real decisions are made. Real decisions grow slowly. They sit in the back of your mind. They follow you during routine. They wait until you're mature enough to face them. By the time the thought of leaving became clear, Shaolin had already shaped nearly every part of his life. Not just his strength. Not just his discipline. His thinking. His posture. Even the way he handled silence. When discipline enters your life early, you don't recognize it as control. You recognize it as normal. That's something you only understand when you get older. As a young man, you think structure is safety. As an older man, you realize structure can also be a cage. Inside Shaolin, everything was decided. When to wake up. When to train. When to eat. When to be silent. Even suffering followed a schedule. Outside Shaolin, nothing was decided. And that terrified him. People think fear comes from danger. That's not true. Fear comes from responsibility. Inside Shaolin, responsibility was shared. Outside Shaolin, responsibility would belong to him alone. In the weeks before he left, Shi Yan Ming began noticing things he had ignored for years. He noticed how the temple sounded at night. The way footsteps echoed longer. The way silence felt heavier. The way lantern light softened the stone walls. He noticed the older monks. Men who had devoted their entire lives to discipline. Men who were respected. Men who were skilled. But also men who had never chosen another life. Their movements were perfect. But their lives were narrow. That observation stayed with him. Shaolin had taught him how to endure pain, but it had never taught him how to choose his future. And there is a difference between endurance and freedom. Endurance keeps you alive. Freedom allows you to live. On the night he decided to leave, there was no anger inside him. No rebellion. No hatred. Just certainty. Certainty is rare. And when it comes, ignoring it becomes impossible. He packed almost nothing. A few belongings. No money worth mentioning. No clear destination. But he wasn't unprepared. Shaolin had trained him to survive discomfort. To stay calm under pressure. To move forward without reassurance. Those skills matter far more in real life than perfect technique ever will. As he stepped away from the temple grounds, fear arrived. Not sudden fear. Heavy fear. Not fear of punishment. Fear of accountability. When you leave structure, every outcome becomes yours. Success is yours. Failure is yours. There is no one left to blame. That realization weighs heavily on a man. I've seen many men reach this moment. They stand at the edge of change. And then they turn back. Because stepping forward means becoming responsible for who you become. Shi Yan Ming kept walking. Each step away from Shaolin felt heavier than years of training. But discipline doesn't disappear. When structure disappears, it follows you. And that discipline was about to be tested in ways Shaolin never prepared him for. Hunger, loneliness, rejection, confusion. The world outside the temple. doesn't care how disciplined you are. It cares how adaptable you can be. That night was not the end of something. It was the beginning of everything. Because leaving Shaolin was the easy part. Living without it would be the real test. After Shi Yan Ming walked away from the Shaolin Temple, there was something he didn't expect. Silence. Not the disciplined silence of training halls. Not the controlled silence of meditation. This was different. This was the silence of the unknown. When you leave a place that has defined you, the world doesn't immediately rush in to replace it. At first, there is emptiness. Shi Yan Ming kept walking. Not because he knew where he was going, but because standing still felt more dangerous than moving forward. I've learned something over the years. When a man leaves structure, the first thing he loses is direction. Inside Shaolin, every step had purpose. Outside Shaolin, purpose had to be created. That night, with every step away from the temple, his thoughts grew louder. What if I'm wrong? What if I fail? What if this discipline means nothing outside those walls? These are the questions that stop most people. Not fear of pain, fear of regret. Shaolin had prepared his body for hardship, but it had never prepared his mind for doubt. And doubt is heavier than pain. As the hours passed, the world around him felt unfamiliar. Sounds were sharper. Spaces felt wider. There were no rules here. No schedules. No one telling him what came next. Freedom, at first, doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like exposure. I've seen men retire after decades of routine. They imagine freedom. What they get is confusion. Shi Yan Ming experienced that same confusion. In those first hours outside Shaolin, he wasn't weak, but he was unanchored. Discipline had always told him what to do next. Now discipline had to answer a harder question. Why? He realized something important. Shaolin had trained him to obey. Now he had to learn how to decide. Decision-making is a muscle, and it's one most people never train. As dawn approached, fatigue set in. Not physical fatigue, mental fatigue. Because when you are truly free, your mind never rests. Every choice matters. Every mistake is yours. That's when hunger arrived. Real hunger. Not controlled hunger. Not scheduled meals. Hunger without certainty changes how a man thinks. Shaolin had taught restraint. But restraint is easier when food is guaranteed. Now, there were no guarantees. Still, Shi Yan Ming didn't panic. Why? Because discipline doesn't disappear overnight. Discipline whispers when comfort is gone. It tells you to stay calm, to observe, to adapt. He didn't beg. He didn't rush. He didn't collapse into fear. He assessed. This is something people misunderstand about discipline. It's not about strength. It's about clarity under pressure. Shi Yan Ming moved carefully, watched people, listened more than he spoke. Shaolin had taught silence. Now silence kept him safe. As the day unfolded, he felt something else surface. Loneliness. Inside Shaolin, you're never alone. You're surrounded by others who share your routine. Outside, you are truly alone. Loneliness doesn't hit all at once. It arrives slowly. It sits beside you. It asks questions. Who am I now? What do I belong to? What was all that training for? Those questions don't have quick answers. I've known men who leave their entire past behind and spend years searching for meaning. Some never find it. Shi Yan Ming didn't have answers either. But he had something else. Endurance. Endurance doesn't solve problems. It keeps you alive long enough to solve them. As night approached again, the weight of his decision became clearer. There was no going back. Even if he returned physically, he could never return mentally. Once a man tastes choice, obedience never feels the same. This is the point of no return. Not distance. Awareness. Shi Yan Ming accepted that whatever came next would belong to him. No teachers. No protection. No forgiveness for mistakes. That acceptance didn't bring peace. But it brought honesty. And honesty is the foundation of every real life. Shaolin had given him discipline. Now life would demand wisdom. That night, under an unfamiliar sky, Shi Yan Ming slept lightly. Not because he was unsafe, but because he was alert. Discipline teaches you to rest, without losing awareness. As he lay there, one thought returned again and again. I chose this. Not everyone gets to say that. Most people live inside choices they never consciously made. Shi Yan Ming had made his. And that matters more than comfort. By morning, he understood something deeply. Leaving Shaolin was not an escape. It was a responsibility. Responsibility to live honestly. Responsibility to fail openly. Responsibility to build meaning without permission. That responsibility would soon take him far from China, across oceans, into a world that didn't know his discipline, didn't value his silence, didn't care about his past. And that world would test him harder than Shaolin ever did. Because discipline inside a system is protected. Discipline in the world is naked. And that is where the real story begins. Long pause. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened when Shi Yan Ming arrived in America. With no money, no language, no home, only discipline and a willingness to start from nothing. When Shi Yan Ming arrived in America, there was no sense of triumph, no feeling of arrival, only shock. America didn't greet him. It ignored him. The streets were louder than anything he had known. The pace was faster. The faces were unfamiliar. And the language might as well have been silence. In Shaolin, silence was chosen. In America, silence was forced. He couldn't explain who he was. He couldn't explain what he knew. He couldn't explain where he came from. Imagine carrying a lifetime of discipline inside a body the world doesn't recognize. People looked at him and saw nothing special. No rank. No title. No respect. In Shaolin, respect was automatic. In America, respect had to be earned. This is where many men break. They confuse invisibility with failure. They mistake struggle for proof that they made the wrong choice. Shi Yan Ming did neither. He had learned something important long ago. Hardship is not punishment. Hardship is information. America began teaching him lessons Shaolin never could. In Shaolin, effort guaranteed progress. In America, effort guaranteed nothing. He trained anyway. Not because anyone asked him to. Not because anyone was watching. Discipline doesn't disappear when applause disappears. At first, survival came before dreams. A place to sleep, food, safety. There were moments when hunger returned. Real hunger. But this time, it didn't scare him. He had met hunger before. Loneliness returned too. But it felt different now. In Shaolin, loneliness came from structure. In America, loneliness came from anonymity. No one cared who he was yesterday. Only who he could be today. That's a harsh truth. But also a fair one. Slowly, something unexpected happened. People noticed. Not his past. His presence. The way he stood. The way he moved. The calm he carried into chaos. Discipline speaks a language even words can't hide. Someone asked him to teach. Not because he claimed authority, but because authority followed him naturally. At first, there was no school, no reputation, just small spaces, few students. He didn't teach Shaolin as performance. He taught it as survival. This wasn't about fighting. It was about control. Control of fear. Control of ego. Control of reaction. American students didn't understand Shaolin culture, but they understood discipline. They understood clarity. Shi Yan Ming realized something powerful. Discipline is universal. Only the language changes. He wasn't exporting Shaolin. He was translating it. Over time, students returned. Then more arrived. Then word spread. Not because he advertised, but because authenticity travels faster than marketing ever will. Shaolin Temple USA wasn't built on tradition alone. It was built on trust. Trust that discipline still mattered in a distracted world. Trust that silence still had value in a noisy culture. Trust that mastery wasn't about dominance. It was about alignment. Shi Yan Ming never forgot where he came from, but he never lived there again. Shaolin had given him roots. America gave him space. Roots without space become confinement. Space without roots becomes chaos. He carried both. Looking back now, leaving Shaolin wasn't betrayal. It was evolution. Discipline had done its job. It had prepared him to stand alone. That's the goal of real teaching. Not dependence. Independence. Many people misunderstand masters. They think mastery means control over others. Real mastery means control over self. And that understanding only comes when structure is gone. Shi Yan Ming didn't leave Shaolin to escape it. He left to complete it. Because discipline isn't meant to keep you inside. It's meant to prepare you for the world outside. And if you're listening to this story now, especially later in life, understand this. It's never too late to choose consciously. It's never too late to take responsibility. You don't need to leave a temple. Sometimes you only need to leave the version of yourself that no longer fits. Shi Yan Ming walked away from Shaolin, but he never abandoned discipline. He carried it across oceans, across cultures, across doubt. And in doing so, he proved something quietly powerful. True discipline doesn't break. When structure disappears, it finally reveals itself. And that is the true story of the night Shi Yan Ming left Shaolin.